One. Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parasha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, Highland Park Conservative Temple, congregation Anshe Amena. Joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Sheikh, the Day School of Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanowski, Anshe Chesed, New York City. You know, Barry, you were saying before we started that this is like the last week of your vacation.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So for Jeremy and I, the summer's like over already. Okay.
Rosh Chodesh Elul, man.
It's over. It's been over.
Well, you're a real man.
We are real men, of course.
And I don't know about you, but I have been diligently avoiding work as much as it's humanly possible.
Okay. People, are starting to get in the habit of saying, do you know what you're going to talk about for the holidays? And I go like, it's going to be really great high holidays. Right now, it's going to be very short sermon. Very short.
Do you know what you're going to talk about? Judaism.
Judaism.
Tshuva. I will say the one small following thing in this context, which people might take some notice of. Given everything that's going on in Israel, this is the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War.
Yeah.
It is the 30th anniversary of the Oslo Accords.
Okay.
It is the 45th anniversary of the Begin-Sadat Camp David Accords.
Wow.
And it's the third anniversary of the Abraham Accords. So there's significant. I mean, the third anniversary of Abraham is a little bit different, but 50 from Yom Kippur, 45 from Camp David, and 30 from Oslo. Those are pretty big anniversaries.
They're all momentous. It's all a matter of how you roll the dice on the in the chronology of Israel. And speaking of rolling the dice, what we decided to do is pull out one of our tried and true methods, because this parsha, in addition to being an amazing parsha, Parasha Ki Tetzei, also contains the most number of mitzvot in the Torah. We've said this before, it's the most mitzvah-dense parsha in the Torah. Because there's so much to talk about, we decided that we would have our random verse generator generate a verse for us randomly. And today I chose this random verse generator. Now we're going to have to decode it a little bit, because I have one die for 4, which is 4-sided, and another that's 25-sided. So we're just going to have to add the numbers, because there are 4 chapters in this parsha. So one will be chapter 21. Okay. So I'm rolling the dice, and I'm going to go to you.
Well, then we have to have 5, because
5 chapters. 5.
Yeah, 5 exactly.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay. All right. So my custom die 1. Okay, here we go. Rolling now, and this is going to go to Barry. Okay, so this would be chapter 22, verse 11. 22, verse 11. Beautiful. Lo tilbash shatnez, tzemer ufishtim yachdav.
Okay, well, I come from a family that was in the clothing business for a number of years.
Translate.
Shatnez. Shatnez. Okay. So first, the verse is
you shall not wear.
Right. Okay. Do not wear shatnez, a combination of wool and linen together. And the simple explanation seems to be that wool comes from an animal and linen comes from a plant, and therefore it's the kind of mixing of the domains which the Bible often frowns upon. One of the things that speaks to me about this verse is when people used to go to Mo Ginsburg's for suits, many of the suits had a little tag saying inspected for shatnez.
Yeah.
And if Mo Ginsburg hadn't done it, I'm sure a lot of people would not have done it, although there are plenty that went there, obviously, that needed to know these things. But the best comment about shatnez I've ever heard came from the late Rabbi Louis Jacobs, who in one of his discussions of mitzvot is saying how, there's no question that a mitzvah that's moral we have to observe. And there's also probably no question that one that we think is immoral, we're not supposed to observe anymore. But what do we do about one such as shatnez, which is moral neutral? And he believed that we should observe it because there's no loss in observing it. It's part of our tradition. We may or may not like it, but there's no reason not to observe it that would compel us to violate the tradition. And I think that's an important note for us who wrestle with the tradition every week, apparently. And it helps us navigate the whole realm of halakha, of Jewish law.
What about the interpretation that says that Shatnez actually was a weave that was on the Kohen Gadol? That the cord of the Kohen Gadol was linen wool weave, and that in deference to the kind of sanctity of that mixture, we preserve that mixture in the holy domain, and in the non-holy domain, outside of everything Kohen, you can't wear it. In other words, it's like saying, by royal appointment, there are certain things that belong to the monarch.
So the curiosity here, and I actually know nothing about it, which separates me from not too many of the other programs, is the term itself, shatnez.
Yeah.
Because the verse reads very well without the word shatnez. Lo tobash samer ufishtim yachtav. So it would suggest to me, in all humility, that shatnez is probably not a priestly term. And therefore, that explanation, which has a certain logic to it, even compelling logic, doesn't seem to work itself out with all the details of the verse.
Well, now I have to look at Vayikra, because that point that you're making right now about the verse reads perfectly well without the word shatnez. If I'm remembering, where's the word as it appears in when it appears in Leviticus? All right, so I'm not finding the word right now. I'll find it in a minute. But it just says shatnez, and here in Devarim, it explains what shatnez is. So I think Michael Fishbane writes in a book about interbiblical interpretation, is that what you have in the Devarim is the later explanation of what was in Vayikra a clear word, which by Devarim's time is no longer a clear word. So they explain it. Here it is. Behemtecha lo tarbia kilayim, don't crossbreed animals. Sadcha lo tizra kilayim. Ubeged kilayim shatnez lo ya'aleh alecha. Don't crossbreed animals. Don't plant multiple crops in a single field. And beged kilayim shatnez lo ya'aleh alecha. Beged kilayim shatnez. You know that it's some sort of mixture, but it doesn't say tzemer ufishtim yachtav. With respect to the Kohen Gadol, which I think this is a very interesting element. If I understand this correctly, first of all, the Kohen Gadol wearing shatnez, it may also be the weave of the garment, but it definitely is the fact that tzitzit, which have techelet in them, are wool woven into a garment which is otherwise pishtim, flax, linen. And so to this day, if you think that the blue thread in your tzitzit that is available in the market today counts as biblical techelet, and whatever it actually wasn't as a historical matter, it is widely accepted that it is counted as biblical techelet. And today, even today, you could put techelet on your talit, your otherwise linen talit, if you had them. Most of our talits are wool anyway, but if you had one, you could put techelet on it, because it would be a mitzvah deoraita, for whatever that's worth. Somebody told me, who was like a fabric person, that flax really won't take dye. Flax is always going to be a kind of white or off-white, and the colorful stuff is always going to be wool. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I would think that one of the things about shatnez then would mean, like, it shouldn't look stupid. It shouldn't be a patchwork. You can tell that that's wool over there, and that's, when it says Mo Ginsburg is inspected for shatnez, we're assuming that that's some sort of finely analyzed chemical analysis or something like that. I think ancient people probably just said, look at that yokel over there whose clothes are patchwork. The guy doesn't even know how to dress himself.
Yeah, it's long.
So I would say two things. First of all, what's striking in what you say, Jeremy, is that in Shmot, when God summons us to be his people, he wants us to be a Mamlechet Kohanim, a kingdom of priests, and therefore wearing priestly garments would fit in nicely with that. So I have to share with you what Jeffrey Tigay writes. This is why it's always good to do your homework before the show. Prohibition cannot be viewed as protecting the distinction between species, as some rabbis have suggested. It does not prohibit combining wool and linen, but only wearing a cloth made from that combination. The rabbis could think of no explanation for this prohibition and considered it one of the commandments for which there is no apparent reason, in which other nations and the impulse for evil challenge, like the ceremony of the broken-necked heifer in 21:19. Josephus's conjecture is probably correct. The prohibition applies to the laity because the priests, when they officiate, do wear garments of such mixtures. The status of such garments is thus comparable to that of the sacred anointing oil and the incense that is used in the sanctuary and may not be made or used by lay persons as stated in Exodus 30:22-37.
Get the point here.
So I defer to Professor Tigay.
All right.
I mean, the fact that Vayikra groups this mitzvah with crossbreeding animals and cross-planting fields seems to say, but Jeffrey Tigay is writing here about Deuteronomy, so
yeah,
we'll leave this B'tzarchiyim.
And Litzchuto, he's writing well about Deuteronomy.
Yes, good for him.
We'll have to give it a second opinion. Okay. All right. Pulling up the dice here. Going to go to Jeremy now. Here we go. Rolling the dice. Okay, here we go. So it's 312. That would be what?
23 verse 12.
23 verse 12. Okay. Now, this is funny. It's I can give it a homiletical depth, but it is kind of funny. It's a part of a series of verses about military hygiene and latrine practices. When you go out as a troop against your enemies, be on guard against anything untoward. Asheloya mikol davar ra, from everything bad. So now the homiletical way I would read this is verse 10, but 12 is in this package. The homiletical way I would read this, and this is, by the way, Ramban has a wonderful Ramban on that verse. Ramban Nachmanides says about that when people go into battle, they lose all moral restraint. They are completely vicious, and you should not be that. You should guard against ransacking people's homes and battlefield rape and all these kinds of things. So that's the deep meaning of the nishmarta mikol davar ra. But in context, the Torah says, if somebody has a seminal emission, they better immerse in water, and then only after they immerse in water can they return to the military camp. And around the evening, when the sun sets, that's in ancient Bible times, what they did is they immersed during the day. They were separated until sunset, and when the new day began at sunset, then they came back into the camp. But 13 and 14 are kind of funny. Everybody should have their own shovel. And what do you do a shovel with in military camps? You've got to dig a hole before you need to
do your business.
And then cover up your excrement, because verse 15, Ki Adonai Elohecha mitalech b'kerev machanecha, God is in the midst of your camp, lahatzilcha, to save you, rescue you, v'latet oyevecha lefanecha, and to make your enemies submit to you. V'haya machanecha kadosh. And so your camp has to be holy. V'lo yirevecha ervat davar, v'shav me'acharecha. And God shouldn't see in you something gross, disgusting, and then reject you. Now, of course, this is a kind of naive thing. What the master of the today we're recording this on a Wednesday, and the song for Wednesday includes the great line, Will the one who planted the ear not hear? Does the one who gave you the eye not see? Come on, that's Psalm 95. What, God who created us doesn't know that human beings defecate? That's ridiculous. But the idea is the camp shouldn't be like just a frat house, a hefker, a disgusting place. You have to, even in times that might produce in you, wildness and obnoxiousness and out of control behavior, even then you have to seek and aspire to some refinement.
Cool. Good job. All right. Now I guess it's my turn. So here we're going to go. I'm going to spin the dice, rolling the dice now. So we got 3-2, which would be 23-2. Is that it?
Oh, gosh. Oh, goodness. Take a look.
You just did it. You just did 23. So no, you didn't. 22.
I did 23-12, but you got 23-2. You don't have to do it. You could do something else.
Yeah, let's do another verse.
Okay.
But repeat the verse for those who we're still looking up later.
Get it. 4-1. Okay. 4-1, which would be 24, verse 1.
Yeah.
Okay, and this one is also not so easy, but it is a big part of Jewish tradition.
Okay. If a man takes a woman as a wife and marries her and has a intimate relationship with her, if he doesn't like her, for he found within her ervat davar, you translate it as a despicable thing. V'chatav la sefer kritut, he should write her a document of severance, v'natan biada, and he shall give it in her hand, v'shilchami bito, and he sends her out from his house. So this is the foundational verse of the whole institution of Gitin. And I know that Masechet Gitin, they just finished Masechet Gitin in the Daf Yomi cycle. I'm no longer on the Daf Yomi cycle. I ended the Daf Yomi cycle somewhere in Shabbat. The second.
I got the
Eruvin. I was in the middle of Eruvin, which is going like, okay, I'm going to go to the 929 cycle. Okay. And of course, the whole discussion was, let's focus on the sefer, the verb. Placing the document in her hand is the transaction of Gitin. And as all Misadri Gitin know, this can become a very complicated process because you have a shaliach, you have a messenger. What constitutes a messenger? What constitutes the document? What constitutes placing? What constitutes taking the document? In the process of Gitin, what happens is it's quite an intricate process, a highly scripted process as we observe it today, where the parties come before the Beit Din, the husband, because the law is written towards the husband has to state to the Beit Din, I want to have a get written to my wife. The names and document is all inscribed on the spot. The scribe then folds up the get and gives the get to the husband or the shaliach, because there are many situations where the husband is not present for the get. And then the get is placed, the document is placed in the folded up fashion into the hands of the wife. She holds it like this. She picks it up. She takes 3 steps with it, all of which is to indicate that she has accepted this get and that the acceptance of the get is voluntary. After which the document is opened again and reread, and all of these rules, in the choreography of the get procedure, have to do with all sorts of mischievous things that happened over the course of centuries. How people would give a get, erroneously, or people would give a get, for economic gain, or people would give a get for all sorts of nefarious reasons. And so, to preserve the integrity of the process, because it's such an important moment. Each and every detail of the process is spelled out, and that has its headline, so to speak, in that verse. In terms of what ervat davar is, and what's a despicable thing, all of these are subject to wild and varied interpretations, which we're not going to get into.
No, but it's worth noting that a simple reading of the verse seems to suggest that the reason for divorce is what we call today irreconcilable differences.
Yeah.
And up until relatively recently in our country, that was the one reason that you cannot get divorced. You can only get divorced for adultery, which follows the Christian tradition. They have a whole different outlook on divorce than Judaism does. And, it's interesting that the Bible seems to prefigure this idea of irreconcilable differences, that not all marriages are destined to last.
Yeah.
I feel like, in ancient Jewish literature, Beit Shammai does propose that adultery is the only grounds for divorce. And because marriage was, it's like really, really hard. Any of us who have studied rabbinic literature are always not so dimly aware that their world is just unimaginably different than ours. And some of the stuff that they say is like, where is that coming from? And in what contexts of human relationships and social structures does something make sense? There's a kind of famous Mishnah about dividing up an estate too small to cover all the kitzubot. The person has multiple wives, the man has multiple wives, and he owes them kitzubot, and he dies, and his estate's too small to cover. And how do you divide it up? And the Mishnah says, well, first wife takes first, and second wife takes second, etc. But there's this other Mishnah that has the three wives, and it divides it up in a complex little way. And the only way to make sense of it is if you assume that a man married three women on the same day. What society, what are you thinking about that somebody could get married to three people?
Well, that prefigured Sun Young Moon.
Well, so there is the account of Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Tarfon was Kohen, and he was entitled to Truma, and he married many, many women so that they would be able to eat from. Yeah,
to give them tzedakah, as it were.
Exactly. So it's conceivable that you can create a scenario where a person would marry more if they were Kohen.
But the part about the grounds for divorce or irreconcilable differences, I think because men were assumed to be, and to whatever degree this was true in the ancient world, I'm not in no position to say, economically powerful, and women were assumed to be economically much less powerful. And so I think that the modern reader, and not just the modern reader, but through history, the fact that husbands have power to say, out with you, and you're on your own now, is seen as economically very disadvantageous to other people, female people, who are already economically disadvantaged. So it makes us say, man, like this is a real power imbalance that needs to be ameliorated. And for centuries, Jews have always tried to ameliorate it. Those of us who are more religiously small c conservative are less bold. Those of us who are a little less small c conservative have been bolder, but it's a problem.
All right, here we go. Next one. Whose verse is this? We're going to get to, boom, 4:11.
24:11. 24:11. Oh, this is good. This one's really nice. Okay. A person, I'm going to start in verse 10. When you make a loan to somebody, lo tavo beito la'avot avoto. You cannot go into their house to seize the collateral pledge. Bachutz ta'amod, stand outside. Va'ish asher ata nosher bo, and the person to whom you are a creditor, yotzi elecha et ha'avot hachutza, and the debtor will bring the collateral pledge outside. V'im ish anihu, and if the debtor is like not just in need of money, but like poor, lo tishkav ba'avoto, you cannot let him go to sleep while the creditor still possesses the pledge. Presumably the pledge itself, the collateral is itself like a blanket, a clothing coat. Hashev tashiv lo et avot bevo hashemesh, kivo hashemesh. Return the collateral pledge to the person before sunset. V'shachav b'salmato and the person will sleep in their pledge. Uverachecha ulecha tiyeh tzedakah lifnei Adonai Elohecha. And then God, for that act of generosity, kindness, dignity, chesed, God will bless you and will consider it an act of tzedakah in God's eyes. Very lovely. Speaking of ameliorating power imbalances, creditors are powerful, debtors are powerless. You know, the fact that somebody needs to borrow from you doesn't entitle you to take their coat and make them shiver in the cold.
Does this point to a theme that is in Deuteronomy, which is the theme that you know, there's a refinement theme, I mean, we talked about it a little bit at the beginning, which is, or the notion that there is a kind of person that you are to become. You're certainly not to be like an Egyptian. You're not to exert power over people. You are to remember the divine spark in every individual. Go ahead.
I want to offer a slightly different interpretation. I think that, as we've discussed before, Deuteronomy is a very political book. And I think that politics is all about power and its distribution. And Deuteronomy recognizes that some people have power over other people. And that's a reality. But all that power entitles a person to is to execute certain decisions. It doesn't entitle you to treat the person as anything less than a human being. And we were talking before the show about some cases where punishment is involved, where the Torah seems to go out of its way to make sure that the dignity of people that are deservedly punished must be maintained. Where we know it's very easy and to mistreat people. And you know, I happen to be reading today of another case of police brutality. And part of the issue with police brutality is this power imbalance, where the people with power, in this case the police, often do not even see the humanity of the person that they're confronting.
Yes. All right, we have time for one more.
Well said. Well said.
Go to the dice here, and it's going to be boom, 125, which would be chapter
25.
Ain, chapter 21 ends on verse 23.
Oh, we have to re-roll. Boom. Roll. 410, 20.
Well, we already read that.
319.
We just read that.
319.
2319. Okay, interesting. Lo tihya kidesha bivnot Yisrael. No Israelite woman will be. Kidesha is presumably a prostitute. The JPS translation is cult prostitute. That's based on the word Kodesh. It sounds like Kidesha is from Kodesh, as if there were sexual cults in ancient temples. Maybe there are, maybe not. But in any event, it's a sexual prohibition against sex commerce. V'lo yihya kadesh bivnei Yisrael, and neither shall be a male equivalent, a male counterpart. Lo tavi etnan zona umechir kelev beit Adonai Elohecha lechol neder. You cannot bring the price of a prostitute, the gift of a prostitute, or the price of a dog to the house of the Lord your God to pay any vow for Kito Avat Adonai Elohecha Gam Shnehem, because both of these things are abhorrent to the Lord. So if verse 18 about the Kidesha is the same as verse 19, the word Zonah, you can ask yourself, why does it use a different word in 18 and 19? But if the parallelism holds, then there should be no male or female prostitutes, and the produce, the monetary outcome of etnan zona, and this is going to be a little bit gross, I'm afraid, my friends, but mechir kelev, the kelev is probably the male prostitute. It's probably not an actual canine, but the male prostitute, not a
canine.
Canaanite, not a
Isn't it
Canaanite.
interesting the way that the text pejoratizes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why Kadesh and Kadesha in verse 18 are simply the names, and verse 19 with those two words Zonah and Caleb are slurs,
Yeah.
like there's something mean to say. Obviously, in a contemporary age, we're not talking. We are much more judicious about how we describe people and sexual behaviors. The Bible here is something very univocal. This is terrible, and it is. I mean, I would say that nowadays people sometimes talk about legalization of sex work, as they say. This is not my position. I don't think this is a good idea. I think I worry about the treatment of people forced by poverty into these degrading professions. I think very, 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 very few people who engaged in sex work are actually self-possessed people who've made choices. I think they're, for the most part, terribly abused people driven by poverty into unimaginable choices. But I do think that the Bible is here saying sex commerce is no go. This is intimate human relationships that deserve care and respect, and some things money can't buy.
That is access to the temple, right? It's about bringing the money to the temple, right? So
the first verse 18 says you cannot have them, but you cannot be them, and verse 19 says you can't use this improper commerce money for sacred purpose. Like this is an ends and means question. Temple is sacred stuff. You can't use improper means to access proper goals.
So, you want to extrapolate that for a second? Just, can you bring your profits from insider trading to, dedicate a Sefer Torah to your shul? Can you?
These are the issues, and of course, what exactly we say, I mean, we can think about all kinds of stuff.
We had that at the seminary in the 80s.
Yeah.
With a certain famous person who dedicated, the library and was later sent to jail. And they took the name off.
First they took his name off the library, then they took the library too.
Although his picture was in that, there was that piece of art that was in the Alpern lobby for many years. It was the ugliest piece of art ever.
Sure.
His picture was in it. No, we could think about this. I mean, I had some members of my shul. Henry Zichron Levacha has passed. Edith is still alive. Edith Everett and Henry Everett. And in the 90s, the president of the UJA Federation of New York was a member of the Tisch family who was in the tobacco business.
Yeah.
And Edith and Henry went bananas that Jewish communal leadership was going to somebody who made money selling poison.
We have this with I haven't watched it, but on Netflix there's the Sackler and fentanyl and
yeah.
And of course
Sackler is OxyContin, not fentanyl.
Whatever.
But it's the same thing. Like if they have made their billions in human degradation, misery, suffering, am I like? How do we think about the fact that there is the Sackler Medical School in Israel and the Sackler wing at the Metropolitan Museum and all of these things? On the one hand, I don't want a sanctimonious culture that in which a tiny number of the pure look down on all the impure. I think that's disgusting, and I also think that being implicated in, I mean, if somebody was like seriously, if somebody like seriously made a ton of money in the most the ugliest ways, and then they wanted to give a Sefer Torah, it would be like parsnip in the extreme.
It would be like this, something like this.
I don't know that today a lot of people believe that money cannot be redeemed. No matter what the origin, it could be spent in such a way to redeem it. I think that idea that money can become treif and can no longer be redeemed, which seems to be the import of our verse, is not as widespread today as it had been in the past.
As a very technical matter, Chazal, or Talmudic era rabbis, they said the etnan zona cannot be given to the temple, meaning if the prostitute was paid by a goat, the goat cannot be offered. It does not mean if the prostitute has a herd of goats and sells off some goats and she has $100 and then she gives the $100, that is okay because it is not the direct. They understand that money is fungible and assets are fungible, and that has actually been true over the history of halakha. Although I would have to say that the idea in the parsha is exactly what you said: is that some behaviors are just so ugly that we shouldn't machshir them retroactively.
Right, but there's a curiosity in the verse, because what is the fee of a whore? Who ends up with it?
I think that the pshat is that the customer gives her the goat in exchange for a sexual behavior.
Interesting.
Right. So in other words, the person who's going to be giving this to the temple is the whore.
Yes.
Like Tamar in the Torah, in the story.
Which is kind of.
Well, no, this part is nice because in its own small way, it's nice. This part is nice to say that the prostitute also loves God, also wants to worship. Also,
she has a vow to fulfill.
Yeah.
Okay, good. And we have a vow to fulfill also, which is that we keep this under 35 minutes. We're at our time.
And this time, I think people would still be interested in listening to us, but it's fine. It's fine.
Of course. But
maybe we'll come back next week.
We want to thank them for watching, for enjoying our discussion here this week. A little different style. It's really, we're very, very honored by your patience, your attention, and your indulgence of our indulgence. In the meantime, we want to wish everybody a beautiful Shabbat, happy Elul, getting ready for the holidays, and we'll see you next week on another edition of Parasha Talk. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.